Our study in the book of Psalms continues today, Tuesday, October the 19th. And I've titled today's devotional, Prayer, God's Prescription for Troubles. Our scripture reading, Psalm 143 and Psalm 144. Now, both of these are ascribed to or credited to David as the author. Psalm 144 is a psalm of worship and praise. Psalm 143 is a penitent, that is a repentant, mournful psalm. And today's devotional will be taken from the latter, Psalm 143. Now, we have seen throughout our study in the book of Psalm a pattern and a practice throughout David's life of prayer. He was assailed by enemies, and he prayed. When trials came and troubles threatened to engulf him, David prayed. When he faced the scourge of the consequences of his sins, he called upon the Lord, confident that God would hear and answer his penitent prayer. Well, Psalm 143 continues David's practice of prayer and opens with the king calling upon the Lord for grace. He implores the Lord, Psalm 143 and verse 1, give ear, that is, listen to my supplications, listen to my plea for mercy. In God's faithfulness, answer me. And in thy righteousness. Now, remembering, righteousness is that God is altogether righteous. He is altogether good. In other words, we can be sure God always will do that which is right. Now, notice in the latter part of that, give ear to my supplications, verse 1, in thy faithfulness answer me, and in thy righteousness. David did not pray for justice, but for mercy. Now, why is that? Well, it's because no man can be justified in the sight of a holy, just God. None of us wants to demand of the Lord, give me justice. Because if we received what we deserve, it would be great judgment. And so we read in Psalm 143 and verse 2, David entreats the Lord and he says, enter not into thy judgment with thy servant, for in thy sight shall no man living be justified. David, now in Psalm 143, does not identify his enemy. We know that he had many enemies over his life, but we do not know the enemy that had caused him so much consternation as we find in Psalm 143. But it was certainly at a low point, a low place in the life of the king. David enumerated the wickedness of his adversary. And he declared concerning that adversary that he had persecuted me, he had smitten me to dwell in darkness. In verse 4, David confessed he was overwhelmed and his heart desolate. Now here's a question for you. Where do you turn when you feel overwhelmed and depressed? Well, David turned to the Lord and he prayed. And then in verse 5, he remembered the days of old. You and I would say he remembered the good old days. He remembered better days. And as he meditated on the providences of God in the past, his ways and his works, the king's spirit was stirred, revived. And he literally and figuratively reached out to God and confessed, verse 6, my soul thirsteth after thee as a thirsty land. You know, the Lord wants believers to have that same passion and longing and to realize only He can satisfy the longing of a thirsty soul. Now, I invite you in verses 7 through 11 of Psalm 143 that you would notice 8 intimate petitions. In fact, each one, David would use the pronoun me. Notice the singular personal nature of David's prayer to the Lord. In verse 7, hear me speedily. In verse 8, open my hearing to thy loving kindness, to your mercy. Reveal to me the way wherein I should walk. Verse 8. Deliver me. Verse 9. Verse 10, teach me. Verse 10, the latter part, lead me into the land of uprightness. Verse 11, quicken or revive me. Verse 11 again, save me out of trouble. Do you notice that each time David says, do this for me, Lord? He confessed his need, he confessed his thirst, and he cried out to the Lord, lead me, save me, quicken me. We do not know what trouble David was facing. However, he was in a place that only the Lord could deliver his soul from sorrows. Now, I have a closing thought for you. You and I live in a sin-cursed world, and it is inevitable that your path will cross with an adversary, somebody who will savor your sorrow. They will enjoy troubling your soul. Where do you turn when troubles come? Many allow troubles to mount up until they resort to counselors, psychologists, prescription drugs, vices, amusements, and even bitterness. But what did David do? He turned to the Lord and he cried for mercy. He assessed his circumstances and admitted he was in a bad place. And then he remembered. He remembered better days and the ways and the works of God. He reminded the Lord in verse 12, I am thy servant, knowing that God is jealous of his servants. I encourage you today. You might be facing a hard time, a place of trial, a place of trouble. Maybe you have even enemies that are out to hurt you, family members that really are asserting themselves against you. Can I invite you to turn to the Lord? Cry out to him and pray. And then remember the former ways of God. He is always good. He is always righteous. And I can assure you, he will do that which is good for you. God bless you. I hope this devotional has been an encouragement. Bye-bye.